in light of the work done by people like James Hansen, Andrew Weaver at the University of Victoria, even Bjorn Lomborg has changed his views and gotten off this kind of skeptical view with respect to climate change in view of what's happening in the north. I don't know if you've had a chance to read a recent book by Lawrence Smith called The World in 2050, where he brings forward all this information, what's happening with the permafrost. How can you be a climate skeptic?
I'm a climate skeptic for 100 reasons, but it's irrelevant to the case of the oil sands, and here's why.
No, but I'd like you to answer the question about skeptic, because...
Okay, well, I'm a skeptic because for a number of reasons. I think my simplest reason is I believe that the Earth warms and cools in natural cycles and has for tens of thousands of years. And anyone who's heard of the ice ages and knows that we're not in one right now can probably intuit that things have warmed and cooled before, even before George W. Bush came around that fast. But I wrote a whole book on it. I wrote a 230-page book about it that I don't propose to summarize now because I've got a much better argument than that. My argument is oil sands oil has a lower carbon footprint than oil from Nigeria and Kirkuk, where they just flare all their natural gas. You're not allowed to do that in Canada. They burn $2 billion worth of natural gas a year in Nigeria. They just flare it. You can see it from space at night. And we don't do that, so our oil has a lower carbon footprint. So I say to the worriers out there, I'm not going to try and change your religion on global warming. That's a dead end. But if you believe in incremental steps, shutting down Nancy Pelosi's heavy oil in California and replacing it with lower carbon Canadian oil sands oil, that is a moral improvement if you believe that global warming is a moral problem. So I'm not trying to talk you out of it, the opposite. I'm counting on it. I'm counting on it. And Ben, you've disappointed me by saying, oh, it doesn't matter.
Sorry, let's point Ben. The final question for Ben, and then we're going to have an intermission. And, you know, it's been 40 years since the first Earth Day, 41 if you believe it started in San Francisco in 1969 rather than 1970. You know, we have all this proliferation of environmental groups, yet it seems that we're not making any progress in addressing the accumulation of greenhouse gases in the atmosphere. What could the environmental movement and the environmental organizations be doing to be more successful?
Well, that's a really good question, Charlie. And you know, a lot of people, good friends of mine, who, you know, some of which went to Copenhagen to be part of the talks there, came back really frustrated because they were hoping that we would have these real solutions in place, that, you know, that real action would happen, and that, you know, we'd see real change. And a lot of us were let down for good reason, because, you know, there was no real treaty that was reached. There was no next step for the Kyoto Protocol, which, by the way, I agree with you, doesn't do nearly enough. And I read your book. It's quite interesting. I liked your tips for debaters, but it was interesting. You know, to answer your question, Charlie, I mean, what we've decided to do with the Wilderness Committee is pick specific things that we can do that actually stop the emission of CO2, to pick specific local campaigns. So every time a new coal mine is proposed, we want to do something about it. Every time a coal-fired power plant is facing either upgrades or being shut down, or a new one's proposed, we want to do something about it. Every time somebody wants to build highways instead of spending money on public transit, we want to do something about it. Because those are real, tangible things that we can win, where we can demonstrate success, and where we can have real victories. And to kind of go back to your question about history, you know, it's interesting if you look at the history. There was a lot of successes in the environmental movement in the 1970s and the 1980s. And I think, you know, ironically, it was right around when recycling came in that many of us stopped paying attention to environmental issues, because I think there's this idea of moral offsets. Like, you can, you know, do your little bit by recycling, and therefore you don't have to get engaged in these larger issues. And to a certain extent, I think this whole vote with your dollars mentality that Ezra's kind of pushing with this, you know, well, if not this oil, then what other oil, you know, leaves us in this realm of, you know, George Soros getting to make all the decisions, because he's the one with all the votes if you're voting with your dollars. You know, so I think environmentalists need to look strategically at, you know, what kind of campaigns can really be successful. And I think the ones that are successful are local. They're community-based, they involve community organizing, they involve people standing up for their own rights in their own community. And, you know, and that's the way that we've always won campaigns. And those, you know, the successes in the 70s and 80s were those kinds of campaigns. It's tough to wrap your head around climate science. You know, I'm, you know, quite a dedicated climate activist, but I still don't claim to know everything about it. It's amazing to me that Ezra does, because I'm sure I've done more reading about it than he has. Or maybe not, he's quite a researcher, it's true. But, you know, skepticism is what scientists do. The scientific method is skepticism. How Ezra can be more skeptical than science, I don't really understand. But you know, at the end of the day, we need to do things locally, and we need to do them aggressively, and we can win, and we need to show that we can win, and then we'll keep winning.
Okay.